The 49ers are shipping Deebo Samuel to the Washington Commanders. We discuss the fantasy impact of this trade for both teams on today's episode of Locked On Fantasy Football.
You are Locked On Fantasy, your daily NFL fantasy podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into the Locked On Fantasy Football Podcast. Thank you for making us your first listen every day. I am one of your co-hosts, Michelle Magdziuk, and when I'm not doing this, I'm a researcher and fantasy analyst with NFL Network.
And I'm your other co-host, Vinnie Iyer. When I'm not doing this, I'm writing about NFL, fantasy, and betting for sportingnews.com.
Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to get started today. We had big news over the weekend. Deebo Samuel gets traded to the Commanders for a fifth-round pick. We didn't know if the 49ers were going to have a suitor, but Adam Peters is currently the GM of the Commanders, who once was the GM of the 49ers, and he was actually the GM who drafted Deebo Samuel back in the day. So he wanted to take him. He's seen him firsthand with his old team. Now, let's discuss the impact of this trade for the Commanders first, then we'll get into the impact of the 49ers playmakers. And then at the end here, we'll tell you where we're targeting Deebo Samuel in 2025 fantasy drafts. But obviously, when we're talking about the Commanders offense, the first thing we think of is Jayden Daniels and how does this impact him? Does Deebo Samuel getting traded here bump up Jayden Daniels at all for you, Vinny?
Yeah, I think it should. I mean, Deebo is still a weapon that can get open all over the field. Now they have that ideal number two. I don't think he was the guy that you wanted in the number one role, but he's not in that role anymore. He's a guy that we can get in to space, short to intermediate routes, and Klif Kingsbury's offense. So he's not going to be put in positions where he's going to have to be the alpha. They're going to try to scheme him open in the middle field. The other thing I don't think you'll see from him again is being used in the running game. They just don't need to do it. They have some depth there. They might add some more in the draft, but with Brian Robinson Jr. and Austin Eckler, they might get a couple other guys or one more guy into the mix. So they're not going to ask him to do that. He's at an advanced stage. So again, he's not going to be that dominant player you're looking for, but this is the ideal system, right? Short passes, intermediate, getting him to space, after the catch, open field production. So I don't see him necessarily having a lot of just targets peppered his way. I don't see him having consistently like 12 to 14 targets per game. That's not going to happen with McLaurin and all these other weapons the way they spread it down. But could you see 8 to 10 and some potential in high leverage situations? Maybe they drop some packages for him, the red zone. Yeah, I can see that for sure. But just be wary. This is not the Deebo that was the dominant dual threat fantasy force from years ago. He's going to bump up Jayden Daniels, but they also need to replace some guys. Just keep that in mind. Olamide Zaccheaus and Noah Brown and the other Brown, Diami Brown, these are all guys that they need to consider in free agency. I think also Jamison Crowder is another short area guy, is a free agent. So they've got all these guys that they kind of need to replace here, kind of streamline their offense a little bit. So we know the go-to guy is McLaurin all over the field through the red zone. We know Zach Ertz is not going away if he gets re-signed. We assume he does, unless they really feel great about Ben Sinnott, but he'll be in the mix too, as well as Luke McCaffrey, the two rookies that they were looking at to do some things last year. So it's not going to go all to Deebo here. And again, you're going to chase the past of Deebo. You're going to be disappointed if you do that. So again, think about the current situation. It helps Jayden Daniels, but I don't think it's a big spike that we're looking for because again, Jayden, a lot of his floor is based on his running ability.
Yeah. So I'm just going to put it out there. Everyone who has been listening for a while knows that I follow the 49ers very closely. They're my second favorite team. I do a podcast for them 3 times a week. I have been personally wanting Deebo Samuel off the 49ers this offseason. I think it's a positive for them. I do not think Deebo Samuel is any good any longer. So I'm not going to bump up Jayden Daniels, but I do think it's an upgrade to Noah Brown and Olamide Zaccheaus, right? But the issue with why I'm not going to bump up Jayden Daniels is because I already have him at quarterback 3. I mean, how much more is there to bump up, right? I'm not bumping him up over Josh Allen or Lamar Jackson just because of this trade. I also like when just looking at Deebo, we'll see how they utilize him. I know Klif Kingsbury, kind of wanted this type of guy with the Cardinals. He drafted Rondale Moore to do it. It didn't work. I will say the only guy that has been able to get a Deebo Samuel type of player to work in the NFL, that type of skill player, but that can't really get open on his own. You have to scheme him open. He's very, very bad at creating any kind of cushion or separation on his own, has been Kyle Shanahan. He's like the only guy that knows how to make this work. Now, he's had Deebo, but he can't make Deebo work anymore. Like, this role, I don't believe works anymore in the NFL. He had his career low in yards per route run, in speed at target, and yards after catch per reception, in tight window rate, because, like, again, he cannot get open any longer, especially with the added weight he put on. I don't personally think this was a great trade for the Commanders. But again, they didn't have a lot of options for wide receiver 2. T. Higgins just got franchise tagged. Not a lot of great options out there in free agency. Hopefully, though, they still add in the draft. Now, do you think this hurts Terry McLaurin at all? I obviously do not. But do you on your end? You're a little bit higher on Deebo than I am.
Yeah, I just think he comes in and says, "I'm going to solidify this." Look, again, he's not going to be asked to be the man. It's also a very low risk. Like, 5th-round pick is not that much to give up
Yeah.
for a receiver that could do something. I know there's the injury risk. That's probably what dropped his price a little bit as well, where you couldn't really expend more than that, especially with diminishing returns. So,
And the part where he stinks when he plays, that kind of lowers.
yeah, it's there, but I think you have to keep in mind his mentality, right? I mean, they needed kind of that experienced guy who's going to come in and fire them up a little bit, and I think it's the same effect that Ertz may have. Like, I don't think Ertz is a great player anymore, but I think there's something about him and his leadership. So it actually is going to be a better reality move, I think, for the Commanders, because now Deebo's in a place he wants to be versus a place he didn't want to be. So I'm sure that he had to sign off a little bit or have an idea that he was going to a team like this. It's a rising team. It's a contending team. Peters, I think that relationship also helps. So again, this is the best he could have done, right? In reality, it bumps up a little bit, but again, I think it just helps diversify the offense a little bit. I think no matter what we think of Deebo right now, there's going to be defensive backs and coordinators who are still going to kind of scheme and be ready for Deebo and see what he can do in the open field. And if he's healthy, he's still got some juice in that open field. But again, he just may have a more of a compact, kind of very specific role on this team. And it could be in better, like, top end situations. So you keep him healthy and you also open things up for the other guys. So I think Samuel being there, maybe the results aren't there directly in fantasy in terms of what he does, but in terms of just improving the overall vibe of this offense and the team winning, I think he does that.
It will be interesting because the one area you can say maybe it'll help Jayden Daniels is that Deebo's still able to bring anything to the house, right? I mean, you do have to scheme him open plays, but if you're able to get him some good blockers out there and he is motivated to play that day, because you never know when he's the Kyrie Irving of the NFL. You never know when he's going to want to play. But if he decides he wants to play that day, he can break a lot of tackles and break it to the house for Jayden Daniels to, get those long touchdowns, even though he only threw it a couple yards. So there is that. Now, you brought up Zach Ertz. I do think this probably hurts Zach Ertz the most, this move, right? Because Zach Ertz saw 91 targets last year, only behind Terry McLaurin on the Commanders. And it really was due to necessity because, again, the only other wide receivers were Olamide Zaccheaus and Noah Brown and Diami Brown. Like, they needed someone else, and that was old man Zach Ertz. Now, he only averaged 9.9 yards per reception, right? They would rather give it to a wide receiver who could do more. So I do think this hurts Zach Ertz the most in fantasy, and we were considering late in drafts, and now I kind of think I don't really want to go that route.
Yeah, and you also said it there, and McCaffrey, these are guys in the middle of the field who should have bigger roles, we presume, right? I mean, they were rookies last year. It takes a while to get into Kingsbury's offense. Again, I mentioned all those free agents, the Zaccheaus, the 2 Browns. They do have some openings to eat up those targets, and we'll see. I mean, keep in mind also those targets are capped. So if they're capped and you have 2 younger players being involved more, that's going to also hurt Deebo's ceiling here. So don't go crazy. I think Michelle's right. I mean, we're already pretty high on Jayden Daniels. Deebo moves the needle in terms of making him more comfortable and having another weapon, which is always good for a young quarterback and all that. But I don't think you can expect a dramatic shift. And if that happens, right, the transitive property would say that the 49ers don't lose a lot with Deebo Samuel. So we'll get into their kind of fantasy fallout with Deebo leaving the team and some Brandon Aiyuk rumors as well in our next segment. All right, this episode of Locked On Fantasy Football is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. And when the game tips off in the NBA, the action is just getting started. There's no better place to get in on the action than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can always place live bets throughout games. So even if you miss opening tips and you're out somewhere, you can get back and look at a fourth quarter comeback. You can stay in the action. If you're looking for a bigger payout, you can always combine your live bets in the same game parlay. Those are a lot of fun with players and team results that you can get in on. And it's so easy to do it. They even have some suggestions that you can look at there at FanDuel to make it easier for you. And you got to love using FanDuel's live betting feature because it keeps every moment of the game exciting for you. Whether I'm backing my team for a late game rally or picking a player to win a clutch 3 with his range, I never feel like I've missed my chance. Plus, the app is easy to use, and when you win, you get paid instantly. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. That's only at FanDuel.com. Join FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. FanDuel, make every moment more. The official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, Michelle. So, Deebo, you mentioned as a 49ers observer, fan, analyst, that you don't think there's going to be too much in the way of the 49ers missing Deebo. Well, they've already missed Deebo a lot because he doesn't play and he has some durability issues and they have to move on. So now there's also rumors of Brandon Aiyuk. I don't see that happening here. I mean, it's really hard. You want to get too thin and just have Ricky Pearsall lead the crew with Juwan Jennings behind George Kittle, right? You're still trying to win a Super Bowl. I get it. You got to pay Brock Purdy this offseason. But overall, what does this really do for the 49ers? Because I think it's going to be exaggerated that they lost a weapon here.
I'm really hoping it makes Kyle Shanahan kind of change up his scheme a little bit. Like, Shanahan is one of the best play callers in the league, but we saw last year teams were starting to catch on. Now, there was a lot of injuries. That was part of it. Absolutely. But I do think all the great play callers, right, have had defenses start to catch on to their scheme, and they need to change it up a bit. Now, Shanahan, with how he used Deebo, defenses just knew exactly how they use him. The running completely stopped working. I mean, no team was ever caught off guard, and the efficiency in the running game was terrible. The little short passes, every team was ready for that when Deebo was on the outside. Like, there was no more being surprised and Deebo getting like some open lanes to try to make some blocked some broken tackles. It was very easy to know what they're doing when they're utilizing Deebo. So I'm hoping this actually makes the offense better without Deebo. I will say it's so funny how quickly 1 year can change, right? Last year when they took Ricky Pearsall in the first round, we were like, they're loaded with offensive players. Like, why are they doing this? And now all of a sudden, Ricky Pearsall could be their wide receiver 1 this upcoming year because Brandon Aiyuk, it's not, I don't think he gets traded either, right? They say he's on the trading block maybe, but they paid him $30 million a year last year. The issue is he tore his ACL, MCL, and LCL. It wasn't just an easy ACL fix, right? Which already takes a good year to come back from. It was a very serious knee injury with multiple ligaments being torn. That happened in week 7. We don't know if he'll be back to start the year. Probably not. So I think this is huge for Ricky Pearsall, who showed he had a little bit of something at the end of last year. At week 17, 10 targets, 141 yards and a touchdown. Week 18, even without Brock Purdy, 6 receptions, 69 yards and a touchdown. I do think he showed a little promise at the end of last year, and I think Ricky Pearsall could be a huge value next year.
Yeah, and I think what you look at this situation and you say, I think they're going to change a little bit their direction behind Christian McCaffrey. They got to worry about his injury and his ability to take that pounding. But the problem is they've had like Jordan Mason and Elijah Mitchell, these guys, even Isaac Rendo, who don't give you necessarily that receiving element that you're looking for, short to intermediate. And Kyle Juszczyk is getting older as well. So we talk about a Cam Scatterboot type weapon. I think they could get someone like that, kind of groom him behind Juszczyk, but also use him a little bit because he can catch passes, add some more versatility to the running back spot. And that would kind of, in essence, replace what Deebo might have given them, right? But when you look certainly at wide receiver, it's about the guys that are there and Brandon Aiyuk, Juwan Jennings, and what Ricky Pearsall can do. So Pearsall is the biggest beneficiary. There's no doubt about it because we've seen Jennings. He's often used in the slot here. They mix it up with their personnel, but they also are pretty thin at tight end. So you'll probably see a lot of 11 personnel, 3 wide receivers, unless they invest a tight end, which I think they should in the draft. But I think you'll see these receivers on the field quite a bit often together, Jennings, Aiyuk, Persson. If it takes a little bit while for Aiyuk to get up to full speed with all the injury, then I think you can see even a bigger role for these two guys. What I like about it is that Brock Purdy seems to have chemistry with all these guys, and they have to be realistic, right? You're going to pay Brock Purdy a ton of money, top of market dollar here at quarterback. You couldn't afford to go in that direction at this particular moment. And if Deebo was in a situation like the T. Higgins, Jamar Chase, or Devonta Brown, AJ Brown situation where they were kind of equal producers, I think you would have seen an investment there. But that was the case. They had Persall, they had Jennings. So I'm excited to see what Persall can do. Again, I think he definitely is going to step into that role a little bit more. We'll see how Aiyuk is healthy, but I think it's pretty much what we've seen. It's going to run a lot through Kittle and Aiyuk downfield, and Persall and some of these other guys are going to pick up the slack on those shorter routes.
Yeah, I do like with Persall. I do think like people will definitely start to get hot on him, right? His name will start to come up. He'll start to get higher in price. I do still just think he's going to be such good value because at the end of looking at last year, 400 yards, 3 receptions or 3 touchdowns, right? But missed the first half of the season because he got shot in the chest, a hole in the chest. And he was able to come back in his rookie season after doing that just in the summer before training camp, which is crazy. Took some time to get going and then proved that he could play, make it, I think, and put up some numbers here at the end of last season. Now, I will say George Kittle, I already had him tight end 1. You had him tight end 2. This just makes us more confident about our ranking. He's played 8 games without Deebo Samuel since 2021. He's averaged 19 fantasy points per game in half PPR over those 8 games, 18.7 points per game to be exact, averaged 8 targets per game, 97 receiving yards per game, and had 8 touchdowns over the 8 games without Deebo Samuel. So it has been very, very nice. So I can't move up George Kittle anymore in my rankings, but I do feel much better now about the rankings. We are going to get into where we're ranking Deebo Samuel to close out today's show. I have a feeling you're going to be a bit higher than I am just off of the first talk we had about the Commanders, but we'll get to that right after a quick break. All right, so we have discussed the impact that Deebo Samuel's trade has had on the Commanders offense and on the 49ers offense, but we have yet to say what we think this trade does to Deebo Samuel's fantasy value. This is a great opportunity for him. He's walking into a team that, yes, they have an elite wide receiver in Terry McLaurin, but not a lot else, right? I mean, and even the guys they did have last year, Noah Brown and Olamide Zaccheaus and Diami Brown, they're all free agents this year. We'll see if they bring back any. But there's a lot of vacated targets, 173 vacated targets last year, 119 receptions, over 1,400 yards and 7 touchdowns. Those numbers are from you. Thank you for putting those into our notes. But so there's a huge opportunity here for Deebo Samuel, but does he take it? And how early are you drafting Deebo? Where do you have him ranked for next year among wide receivers?
All right. Taking those numbers a little bit further, and this is assuming all 4 of those guys who are there. There's Zaccheaus, the 2 Browns, and the aforementioned Crowder. If they're all gone, which I would expect, right? I mean, they're all kind of similar receivers. Well, Diami Brown might be more of that deep threat that they could think about keeping, but maybe they'll look at that in the draft. But assume all these numbers are gone. It sounds really juicy, right? But when you add it all up, this is just assuming a lot more things, that Zach Ertz might not have the same prominent role, or that Luke McCaffrey is not going to step up and have a bigger role. Austin Eckler could be healthier to be a key target guy, and Ben Sinnott could be involved if they kind of mix it up with the 12 personnel and 2 tight ends. So the maximum here with this production that we talked about that's vacated is wide receiver 14. That's what the average would have been if you look at that production. Now, that means that's the absolute ceiling for Deebo. Is he going to hit it? Absolutely not, because this team is going to spread around the ball. They're going to run it a lot with Jayden Daniels. He's not going to check down to Deebo very often, right? He's going to take off and run. He's got Eckler, Luke McCaffrey, some other guys he could throw to in the short area. So it's not going to be Deebo there. So when you say that's the max, and that's already at wide receiver 2, Like, I can't see anything except a wide receiver 3 flyer for Deebo. So I don't know if that is higher or lower than you, but I don't see a number that I want to attack him before that 3-0, wide receiver 30. Like, I don't want to be in the business of even thinking about him before wide receiver 30. So I think just buyer beware, fantasy player beware. It's a big name going across, and you said, oh, this is awesome. He's going to be the number 2 to Terry McLaurin. But the reality says, as Michelle said, he's had diminishing play. He has trouble staying healthy. He's above 30. There's a lot of red flags against him producing as an individual performer. Now, could he produce the complementary things that they need as an offense to help other guys, help Daniels? Sure. But I think as an individual fantasy target, you're not looking at best, a wide receiver 3 flex out of him in this position.
Yeah, I think we're really actually quite close here, because I said somewhere in the 30s. Maybe it's high to mid 30s, but definitely after guys, after other wide receiver 2s like Jordan Addison, Jameson Williams, like I would be taking Deebo after him. But maybe like right around, like I'd probably still take a chance on him over Jayden Reed, over Khalil Shakir.
Similar players, right? So,
so it's going to be around that group. Calvin Ridley and him. That's a close one. Would you rather go with Calvin Ridley, who right now is a wide receiver?
Depends on the QB, right? Depends on how the QB. There's a lot to unpack there with the Titans, but depending on who it is, like if it's Cam Ward, I might actually be more excited than a random bridge quarterback, right? So we just have to see how that develops still. But I mean, there are a lot of number 2s in better situations than Deebo Samuel to produce. Again, they can still spread the ball around quite a bit on this team. And when I say spread the ball around, not just in the passing game, but also balance it out in the running game and get guys touches there too. So again, I don't think Samuel is going to have a big piece of that at all, right? I mean, they might have a few running gadget plays there for him, but it's not going to be close to that out of necessity year that he was carrying the ball a lot for the 49ers. Those days are long gone. So again, you just have to evaluate him as a receiver in a spread offense. And you just have to be just reasonable about what you can get from him. And again, wide receiver 3 is about it for me. Maybe a flex play when you look at PPR leagues, right? Because I don't know if the volume is going to be all that high for Deebo Samuel.
So I'm going to say a statement here, and I want you to let me know if you think I'm crazy or not. But I would rather draft Ricky Pearsall in 2025 drafts than Deebo Samuel next year. Do you agree or think I'm crazy?
No, you're not crazy at all, because Brock Purdy doesn't run, and he's going to put the ball up in the air. Pearsall is a big play guy. I think Juwan Jennings is an extended role player, right? He's been really good when he steps up, and he's a slot guy, and he's good at that. But Pearsall, they don't draft a first-round guy in a Kyle Shanahan offense if they don't have some plans. I mean, look, Aiyuk, right? They drafted in the first round. They waited, developed a little bit, and boom, he's a big part of their offense once they got an aggressive, effective, efficient downfield thrower in Brock Purdy, and not Jimmy Garoppolo, who's afraid to throw the ball downfield a lot. So when they had their receiver, we got big plays. So I'm excited about Pearsall. I think this is a great opportunity. Now we're seeing why they took that pick. They're looking ahead, and when you're a good team, you can afford to look ahead and make draft picks for the next year, not the year that you're looking at. So again, before we jump on those situations, I mean, this is not like the Dalton Kincaid situation where it might be a superfluous pick. It's not going to maybe pan out. Pearsall had a specific reason to fit this 49ers offense well, and I think you'll see his talent rise. So he's an exciting deep sleeper. There's no doubt about it. We're going to get a lot more hype. Just don't worry. There'll be a lot more hype about Pearsall as we go on through, especially once they lock up Brock Purdy. Let's forget all these stupid trade rumors with Purdy. Once they lock him up, then we can really focus on the 49ers there.
Absolutely. That is it for today's episode. I want to thank you all for making Locked On Fantasy Football your first listen every day. If you're watching us on YouTube, hit that subscribe button. Listening to us on whatever podcast app you use, leave us a review, 5-star review if you are so kind. It'll help us a ton. Be here for you every single day, helping you win your fantasy football leagues. We will talk to you tomorrow. Bye, y'all.